But first I want to turn to the Scots-Irish immigration of the 18th century, because you say it's a prototype of later post-independence American migration. Explain what you mean by that.
My book, Shaping Our Nation, is about immigration and about internal migrations within the United States. And the first big surge of migration in the late colonial period was the Scots-Irish from Northern Ireland, lowland Scotland, coming across the ocean. So it was immigration. But also it was internal migration from one fringe of the British Empire to another, because this was before the American Revolution. And these were fighting peoples from areas that had had a lot of civil war, strife, violence, and they settled along the Appalachian chain west of the main area of colonial settlement. Quakers in Philadelphia who were pacifists, didn't want these fighting peoples hanging around. They went down the Shenandoah Valley into the Carolinas, over the mountains into Kentucky and Tennessee, and their characteristic as fighting peoples continued. I mean, under their prototypical leader Andrew Jackson, they expelled Indians from what is now the American Southeast, played a major part in acquiring Florida and Texas and California for the United States. And their descendants have made contributions ranging from above average participation in the military services in time of war to country music.
And when you say prototype, so what you're saying is subsequent waves of migration are similar to them in what particular way?
Well, the United States has been peopled by these waves of migration, immigrant and internal, that started unpredictably. Almost nobody predicted that they were going to happen. They lasted for just one generation or perhaps two generations in some cases, and then mostly unexpectedly stopped. And people moved in response to economic incentives, but I think when you have large numbers of people moving from one location to another, there's another factor involved. People are pursuing dreams or escaping nightmares. And it's not always easy to predict what people's dreams are or what their nightmares are going to be.
I'd like to ask you one more question before I turn to Reuben, and that refers to two surges of internal migration about which you write, the so-called Yankee diaspora and Southern grandees who were engaged in plantation slavery, and how they collided and precipitated one of the most traumatic events in American history, the Civil War. Talk about that clash.
Well, this was in the early Republic, in the first half of the 19th century, and you had the New England Yankees, Puritan, moralistic, and intolerant of others who had different moral views. They'd been cooped up in New England for nearly 200 years. With the New Republic, they surged west into upstate New York, northeast Ohio, Michigan, founded Chicago, and wanted to move west from there. They initiated all sorts of reforms. They formed colleges, evangelical churches. They initiated causes like women's rights, prohibition of alcohol, and abolition of slavery. And they wanted to see their way of life prevail as they moved west. In the southern part of the United States, you had these plantation grandees, people who had accumulated a lot of wealth through slaves and through the production of tobacco and cotton and other things. In the early 19th century, they moved from the Atlantic seaboard, the sometimes worn out farm fields of the Atlantic seaboard, to the Mississippi Valley, where they created a sort of cotton kingdom, and they moved their slaves over to in vast numbers. That internal migration was very painful for the slaves. They were transported in coffles and chains and so forth. Families were split up, and that they wanted to move west too. So you had a political fight in the 1850s over slavery in the territories. Would it be allowed or not? And that resulted in the Civil War, the formation of the Republican Party, a North-only party, which was primarily got its votes from New England Yankee diaspora people across the country, and the Confederacy, which was created by the states that participated in this westward migration.